even knew about it. He was up on top. So the whole backstory is that's the highlight of it. And he was shut down. Oh yeah, I tweeted it too. I tweeted it. Okay. He got nominated. Okay. I was wondering. I was just saying because we had to compete locally. And I had done Chuck Brown. Lost. And lost. And I lost. Impressive. Yes, they did. And it was a tie. There were two winners in that category. So it's like, I was like, oh, I got a second chance. I just got so good. Who's that? Yeah, I got two, but I'm not. Well, that's what I read. Yeah. whole wing of stuff. Apple Center, there, in the parking lot, all this, that's what we call high that. But you can go and look for all of this stuff.
I don't, I think it depends what they've done. I was just asking. That's it. You later.
Well, yeah, if it's just that's all. What's the story you're talking about? What happened? You know the PDs. No, that's what I'm saying. What happened? Oh, come on, Sam. I'm going to kick you out of the city. I'm going to come to the city. It's a PD thing claim the way he made famous, whether it's a prisoner. He was a prisoner. Oh, yes, he was a prisoner. Oh, yeah. I stuck around with a prisoner. Turn your credentials.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway. So he's a prisoner, right? And a prisoner, another prisoner, climbs up the top of the water tower and jump off the place. And the warden is there, everybody's been talking down. Now the press is there, right? The TV stations, everybody's out there. And the only guy this guy is talking is Pete. So Petey's a prisoner movie. Well, they do it in the movie. Yeah, in the movie. So they bring Petey out. Petey talks to the guy. And the whole thing was they wanted to have conjugal business. Right? They wanted to get out of conjugal business. And so Petey goes to Ward and says, "This is what we want." Ward is fine, stare him down. Petey puts the guy down, and they get conjugal business, and he's really used to it. So Petey's surrounded by TV cameras, like, what do you say? How do you get him down there? How do you get him to come down? He says, "How do you get him to come down with nothing? Get him to go up there." That was the hard part. I think I never heard that. And he gets out of prison and he does a radio show. Right? And the rest is history. You know, PET. And the rest is PET. Come on.
You know, going back to you've also I get a watermelon.
Yes. Oh, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. You're talking about the story that about her in New York. Yeah. Right. And so we said that there was some kind of riot in New Jersey the first time. By the time CBS got there, they found them. And said, "No, you would say, let me go up that ladder." Roll.
Berlin Center.
Well, it's not Berlin Bowser. It's a biography. It's goes over. It's like 4 different books. He wrote the rise and fall of the Third Reich. But it's about his life. And it is just really, really
Good morning, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by members of my public safety team, and we are going to provide a public safety update. Today, we will address some of the activities that took place over the weekend, and we want to make perfectly clear that we will not tolerate violence of any kind in Washington, D.C. We don't tolerate it if it's on the streets between rival crews, and we won't tolerate it against our police officers, the men and women who are charged with keeping our community safe. And we certainly won't tolerate it against our residents and visitors. At the end of the day, that's simply not what we're about and not what we stand for. In fact, our collective attention in the District of Columbia is reducing violence of all kinds and in all forms and in all places. What we're certainly not going to do is stand by and allow outside agitators to come to our city to distract us from the work of DC residents. Many of our residents are out there protesting themselves and doing so peacefully. Many joined the thousands of peaceable protesters at Friday's March on Washington. But what we saw over the weekend was a stark contrast between Friday, when thousands of people came together peaceably to demand racial justice. They brought with them, the outside agitators, water bottles, snacks, and signs. They brought weapons that would be used to destroy property in the district. Unlike the people we saw on Friday who brought bottles and snacks and signs, and importantly, their voices. On Saturday and Sunday night, we have displayed some pictures from what we saw, were agitators who descended on the city. It sounds like many of them came on Wednesday and Thursday, armed for battle, with fireworks, baseball bats, laser pointers, and they were looking for the police to confront. They set fire to local newspaper boxes, accomplishing absolutely nothing. And I want to be clear, those outside groups of people, we don't know who they are necessarily, who funds them, who organizes them, but we know they came together to create havoc. And they are not the same as our residents who proudly say, Black Lives Matter. What we need as a nation, we know, are systemic reforms. And what these agitators are doing is distracting from what our nation needs. MPD is here to protect people, all people. When there are clashes like what we saw over the weekend, it is because a protest is no longer peaceful and has become violent. I know, and I expect you're going to ask me about what the president tweeted about me over the weekend. And we know that the president considers himself Mr. Law and Order. I want to be very clear, he's coming for the wrong team, because we are for law and order too. We're for DC residents living peacefully. We're for DC residents speaking up for their neighbors and friends and demanding social justice, but we are for peace. We know that those tweets are meant to distract from the failures of the last 4 years. We know that when a president attacks American cities, he's attacking America. And the job of the president is to unite us, not to divide us. We also know what our job is here as local law enforcement. And I want to call on the federal government to assist us the best way they can, and that's by supporting our officers. When we make arrests for violent protest, we need those violent agitators to be prosecuted. When we arrest people with felony charges, we need the U.S. attorney for the district, who is a federal appointee of the president, to prosecute them. Right now, there's no accountability for the people who came to these protests and attacked our police. And we haven't seen a willingness from the U.S. attorney to prosecute them. So let's be clear. MPD has its charge, as it always has, to keep DC safe, to support peaceful protests, and to hold those who will be violent accountable. And we need the federal government to do its job and prosecute these people. Before we take any questions, I want to turn to the police chief, who will go through his report of the weekend's activities.
All right, Mayor Bowser, thank you very much. I'm Pete Newsham. I'm the Chief of Police for the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. In the past 4 days, as the mayor has mentioned, we've experienced a number of demonstrations in the city. It seems like the concentration was in and around the White House. As you know, last week on short notice, we had to plan for a convention here in the city. On Thursday, August 27th, there were a number of folks in the city that were here to protest the convention on its final night. As you know, there was a program that was scheduled on the White House grounds, which was to be followed by a fireworks display at the Washington Monument. Around 6 p.m. On Thursday, groups began to gather throughout the city. Locations included DuPont Circle and Rhode Island Avenue. Around 8:30 p.m., there was a group of about 200 to 300 in the area of the White House that began throwing projectiles at police officers. This behavior escalated around 10 p.m. A group of agitators in the area of 15th and Pennsylvania began launching fireworks at police officers. There was some property destroyed, some small fires set in trash cans and in the roadway. That evening and into the early morning hours, MPD made 8 arrests, 7 adult males, 1 adult female. Charges included assault on a police officer, simple assault, and destruction of property. 4 MPD officers sustained injuries, including an officer with a broken nose, and 3 MPD vehicles were damaged. On Friday, as the mayor mentioned, August 28th, we welcomed tens of thousands of demonstrators to our city who peacefully demonstrated throughout the day. I was out there the entire day and into the late evening, and I have to tell you that that event was facilitated very peacefully, and we had no arrests with the peaceful demonstrations that occurred on Friday. On Saturday, September 29th, in the morning and into the afternoon, we saw groups assemble peacefully throughout the district in the area of the White House on DuPont Circle, Adams Morgan, and the U Street corridor. Around 9 o'clock p.m., members observed individuals using smoke devices, setting off illegal fireworks, intentionally setting fires, spray painting graffiti throughout the Adams Morgan neighborhood. Individuals also used laser pointers to distract law enforcement officers. 2 of our officers had eye injuries as a result of that. Around 11 p.m., a group remained in the area of the White House. Members of this group began throwing projectiles and incendiary devices. The projectiles included glass, bricks, and the like. They also deployed some tear gas. This was not MPD. They shot fireworks at our officers, and some more small fires were set in the area. In response to this very violent behavior, MPD did deploy OC spray and sting balls. 6 MPD officers were injured, including one of our officers who had a vision issue as a result of a laser being pointed into his eyes. We had 2 MPD vehicles that were damaged. The preliminary arrest data shows we had 5 arrests. They were for felony rioting, possession of unregistered ammunition, assault on a police officer, and there was a reckless driving arrest that received a lot of attention. that there was a van that was driving recklessly, potentially could have hit pedestrians and officers in the area. The driver of that vehicle was taken into custody. That vehicle was a van. It was registered on the West Coast in Washington State. We have intelligence to suggest that that van was also at some of the violence we saw in Portland, Oregon, and some of the violent activity that we saw in Kenosha. Last night and into the early morning hours of today, we had a group of over 100 individuals who marched throughout the city. At 9 p.m., this group set 2 small fires in the area of the White House that were quickly extinguished. Around 10:15, they began marching, that's p.m., they began marching towards Thomas Circle. While they were marching, some agitators within the group began to discharge fireworks, smoke bombs, and other munitions towards police officers and buildings in the area. They also used spray paint to deface property. At about 11:45 p.m., they became increasingly aggressive. They were spitting, hurling balloons filled with urine at police officers. Bricks and bottles were also thrown at our officers, as well as fireworks. One agitator attempted to intentionally strike an MPD motor officer, and that vehicle was followed out into the state of Virginia, and we want to thank the Virginia State Police who were able to take those folks into custody. At the end, we had a total of 14 arrests, and those were just after midnight. The arrestees were charged with felony rioting. 5 of our MPD members did sustain injuries during last night's events, and another additional 2 MPD vehicles were damaged. As the mayor mentioned, from Thursday until early this morning, the large majority of the arrestees, over 70%, are not from the District of Columbia, so they appear to be folks who are coming into our city, our peaceful city, with the intent of destroying property and hurting folks. And as the mayor said, and as we constantly say, whenever we have these events in the city, we welcome peaceful demonstrations like we had on Friday. If you come to the city with the intent on destroying property or hurting people, we have a responsibility to take you into custody. We can take any questions that you all might have.
Actually, Sam, before I turn to your question, I want to make an additional point. And because I've just heard and seen and read from so many DC residents about the stress and anxiety that they're feeling, we've experienced a lot of loss in this year. Some of the loss from people that we know well, and others we don't know at all, but we've come to enjoy either on the big screen or on our basketball courts at Georgetown. And so I just want to reiterate to everyone that there's help available, and you should call us. Don't hesitate to call 888-793-4357, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week to talk to a licensed clinician. And I know I speak for all DC residents in celebrating the life of Coach John Thompson, who we watched, we loved, and who brought home championships to DC. And we want to extend our condolences to his family and his Georgetown family, his basketball family, and all people who just love this tower of a man who was an inspiration to many. And this picture to me personifies the great loss of John Thompson. We'll take your questions. Yes, sir.
How long is it going to stay there? I mean, with the barriers and that, at what point might it be just a street again with traffic?
We are certainly working to make sure that we can have more traffic movement on Black Lives Matter Plaza, and we haven't established what that will be as yet, but we will have more traffic.
So it's going to be coming back to kind of a normal situation?
I don't have anything more to add than what I just said.
The chief also said that 70% of the people came from outside of DC. Do we have any sense of how many came from outside of the DMV?
We will certainly have a breakdown of all of those who were arrested, Sam. And I think you will find that there are people who come from stretches of Maryland and Virginia, and people who come from Portland and Minneapolis. I was reading some of the coverage over the weekend where the people quoted about the organized protests were from Minneapolis and Portland. So it just goes to show you that we've had experience all summer with protest, and we're seeing a shift of who's involved and a shift in the types of tactics being used. Yes.
There was the incident a few weeks ago outside of the 3rd district that appeared to include more local groups. My question for you is, in terms of, local groups versus outside, when it comes to the local groups, what is your plan to encourage more peace in the city, and do you plan on putting back a curfew as a result of what's been happening?
If we need a curfew, we'll impose a curfew. We won't hesitate to do it if the chief thinks that is going to help him support peaceful protest. Yes, sir.
Mayor Bowser, one of the complaints we've been hearing from DC residents who are out on the streets this weekend is that they've been caught up in the police response to people throwing objects at police officers. What do you say to the DC residents who contend that there's an indiscriminate police response and they're getting caught up in it?
I'm not sure I understand that question. That what is indiscriminate?
You're saying the police are coming at them at a line, using chemical irritants, tackling people.
Oh, you mean protesters that are hurling things at police?
No, there are protesters who are saying they weren't hurling things at police.
Well, they were. The problem is, and I'm glad you raised that, because there are people who are there to protest racial injustice and demand that the government respond. Unfortunately, when they are among people, or there are people among them who are who are creating chaos and violence against police, it is hard to distinguish between them all. And so the police want to keep them safe too, and they want to keep the surrounding community safe as well.
And are you worried that the police tactics are going to exacerbate tensions further, or harden some of the protesters who were there to protest peacefully to think more negative feelings about the police?
What I'm worried about is this country descending into a race war, Bennett. And I'm worried about the continued incitement of violence from leadership who should be focused on bringing our communities together. So you're asking me about the end result when we need to be talking about what the trigger is. Because our police and peaceful protesters will be safer when we come together as a community and tamp down this black versus white rhetoric. Yes.
Mayor Bowser, could you elaborate a little bit about outside agitators? Representative Clyburn was on TV, I believe it was this morning, saying that he's been told, he didn't really clarify who, but that DC has linked some of these, what you're calling outside agitators, back to the Trump organization and back to funding. You said you don't know who's funding them and who's sending them, but I believe the chief did it. You could also elaborate on how that ban is connected to Kenosha and Portland. But can you help connect those?
No, we can't connect. I don't think anything that we have found can connect any protester to a single group or funder or organization. Though I don't think it would be a big leap to say that the type of organization and resources that they're bringing to bear are organized and funded. I don't think that would be a big leap. So our intelligence, we know, of course, I know the chief will tap into our federal resources as well, our partners, to find out any intelligence we can that will help us prepare and police these situations. Let's just be clear. We're at the end of August. We're August 31st, first day of school. But we have a very contentious election approaching, and we all want to be best prepared to keep our city and our country safe.
You were the chief you could elaborate on the van and how you know
The ban,
the van that the chief said was connected to
the van.
yes,
Yes.
Portland and Kenosha. Thank you.
So the van was, like I said, it was registered to out in Washington State. And if you look on social media, you can see images of a van fitting its description in Portland and also in Kenosha. So it's indicative, the intelligence that we have is indicative that that van was out at those events. And I think you can also see some live streams where some folks are talking about that van in particular being at those events.
Do you think it's connected to, he was suggesting a Trump thing, or do you have any sense?
I don't know anybody who suggested that this was connected to the president at all. One of the things that we're certainly going to do is if there is a connection, if it is an organized, funded attempt to create violence in our city, we're going to do everything we possibly can to get to the bottom of it. The other point that I think that this weekend really illustrates very well is that you talk about peaceful protesters, and we can all reflect on Friday, which was the largest event by far that we had in our city. We had 0 arrests. We had very little, if any, violence in our city when tens of thousands of people descended. The police, and this is to your question, Fennett, they are reactionary to violence and fires and the throwing of weapons and the using of lasers against police officers are human beings too. When you throw bricks and rocks and bottles and urine and you set fires, there is going to be a police reaction. So folks who want to suggest or paint the picture that this was somehow peaceful and the police indiscriminately used munitions against them, they're not being honest. Yes, ma'am.
Do you guys have any response to the videos that we saw and over the time that you're talking about here of diners in DC being harassed by these protesters? Do you believe that these were also the outside agitators that you're speaking of, or were these local?
Yeah, it's hard to say on the diners. First of all, I will say this, the behavior is abhorrent. It's not something that anyone should have to experience in our city. And it is potentially illegal. And the mayor asking MPD to intervene, I think, is appropriate. If something like that should happen to anybody who's either a resident or a visitor of the District of Columbia, we would hope that the establishment would call the police. And to answer your question, we don't know where those folks were from. We did not make arrests, and to my knowledge, in fact, the police were not even called to those circumstances.
When you say potentially illegal,
there's a disorderly statute that potentially covers the behavior, and there's also a potential for if the managers of the establishment does not want the folks on the property and they're warned, they could be arrested for unlawful entry. Yes.
Chief, the mayor mentioned that you would avail yourself of federal resources, federal partners. Are you asking the FBI to help investigate what's been happening, what you see as these outside agitators coming in? And I don't want to put words in you or the mayor's mouth, but do you consider this domestic terrorism?
I think there's a potential that that could be the case. So that's one other thing. That it could be domestic terrorism. I do think that what the mayor suggested, that this could be organized and funded. I think those are all potential, and we would certainly ask our federal partners to assist us in getting to the bottom of it. And this isn't just Washington, D.C. We've seen violence in other cities, and to the extent that that is coordinated, us in law enforcement, we have a responsibility to find out if it is, and then to answer that question, who, and hold them accountable.
The FBI, have you been in contact with them to ask them to help investigate this?
They are involved, yes.
And may I just add to that, Mark? I mentioned one very specific thing that our federal partners can help us with, and that is prosecuting people that have been arrested for this violent activity. The president was pretty specific in his tweet at us that we need to arrest people. And I would say to the president, our officers do the hard work of making arrests. Your prosecutors need to do the hard work of prosecuting these cases. And we're talking about these violent protests now, but there are other issues that we want the prosecutors' attention to that involve neighborhood violence. DC residents demand justice, and we need, as long as we have U.S. prosecutors prosecuting all of our local crimes, we need them to do their jobs. We'll take a couple more. Yes, sir.
Are they not prosecuting these people once they're arrested? Is that what's
I'll
happening?
ask the chief to talk about that.
So the one instance in particular where we wanted to see some prosecutions was when we had the riot here on August 13th. The large majority of the cases, I want to say all but one, were no-papered. And I've asked the U.S. Attorney's Office repeatedly to pursue those cases, and we haven't gotten the assistance from them that I have, frankly, to be the assistance that I've grown accustomed to.
Normally, they would be prosecuting in these cases, and now they're not.
It appears that way, yes.
Is there anything that indicates that that is a directive from the White House?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yes.
Why were so many police officers at Black Lives Matter Plaza to begin with? Was it because that there was intelligence that that some of these outside agitators, as you put it, would turn violent?
Whenever we have potential of problems in the city from folks who are going to create problems, like we saw 3 of the past 4 days, we have police assets staged throughout the city, and the area of the White House has been an area of concern throughout this. So we definitely have police officers staged in the area of the White House. The police officers will react once the violence begins.
Actually heard from anyone in the Trump administration beyond the tweet that Trump sent?
Yes, and we will continue to be in contact with all officials that can impact safety in the district.
Have they raised anything? Have they suggested anything that they would do to follow up on the federal government assisting in cleaning up the city, as the president put it? Have they re-raised the possibility of a federal takeover of MPD?
Not specifically, Finette, so I can't speak for what they are thinking, but we know the things that they're responsible for in the district that need to be done, and prosecuting these cases is one of them. All right, last two, yes.
Chief, can you tell us anything about ATVs in the city over the weekend? There were some incidents. I witnessed some myself. What can you tell us about it?
We had multiple ATV rides throughout the city on, I believe it was Saturday. It could have been Sunday, but I'm pretty sure it was Saturday. That's actually, we haven't seen it in recent weekends, but that's not uncommon here in the district.
Any arrests connected to it?
No arrests, no. But what we do with the ATV rides is whenever they're out there, because as you know, that's illegal in the District of Columbia, we get as many images of the violators as possible. I haven't checked on how many images that we've got from this past weekend, and then we will share those images with the public and hope they will come forward and help us identify the riders, and we'll obtain warrants if we can.
Prosecuted any ever?
Have we prosecuted any?
Prosecuted.
Yeah, a number of them, yes.
Those are off topic on day one of school. Can you tell us how it's going? And anecdotally, I've heard that there may be some problems technically with some students logging on or getting access to the system. Do you have any update on day one for schools?
Well, day one, I will say how, while it's a different first day of school, we are excited for our children to be in front, if only virtually, in front of their teachers and being able to see their fellow classmates, have instruction, new material being presented to them, and touch points with adults that can put them and their families in touch with a host of resources. So we're very excited about that. We have spent all summer evaluating the needs of our students and families and distribution, as we have discussed, for devices, tablets, and or hotspots has been underway. DCPS will be able to provide the specific numbers, but families, if they still continue to have technical needs, devices, hotspots, or they need assistance connecting, they should contact their school. And I'm going to ask DCPS to also provide an additional phone number for tech support. I'm told the chancellor called me before we came in to tell me that the tech support line, there was very, very high demand for that. So they are in the process, and it may be done, but in the process of setting up an additional phone number for tech support. And I think he mentioned that the predominant request for help has been around passwords and the like. So if DCP hasn't released it yet, they will be releasing a second number to help field questions about passwords.
Question. Maryland and Virginia have both now been approved for the additional $300 a week of unemployment insurance from FEMA. The latest information that I could get was that DC has not even applied for that yet. Has DC applied for that $300, and what can you tell the unemployed what the status of that is?
We can tell them that we will release an application. Then the application period is open. We're disappointed that the federal government has halved the benefits to people who really need it. We're disappointed that there hasn't been a piece of legislation passed to fully respond to COVID for the unemployed, for state and local governments who need the funding that's in the HEROES Act, and we hope that that happens. We also know that using FEMA dollars for unemployment may mean down the road that there's fewer FEMA dollars to respond to COVID testing and tracing and vaccines that are going to be needed to get our economy fully up and going. So I think this is kind of a stopgap, if you will, that our government still needs to come together to fix. So in long answer, we will apply for the additional $300 because that's the only option that we have to give some additional relief to people. But keep in mind, they had been getting $600. They will be now getting $300 when our application is approved, and we're able to start releasing those additional dollars.
Do you know the timeline on how long that takes, and when DC residents or DC recipients would be expecting that extra $300?
I don't know the exact date, but the technical part of turning it on is not difficult or long.
What about the extra $100? I mean, some states are giving extra $100. Is DC going to participate in that?
I don't follow you.
Well, the feds give $300, and they said that the states would give an extra $100.
Our $100 contribution is part of the benefit, the traditional unemployment benefit we already provide. So the additional, what they call the PUA, but they call it a bonus, not really a bonus, is $300. That's on top of traditional unemployment benefits.
Separate question for the chief, if that's okay.
Yes.
In regards to the mass shooting, is there any update to the investigation? What happened with calls for backup there? And then also, just to go back to the unrest seen this weekend in DC, we saw this earlier in June as well. Is there any information to believe that these are the same outside agitators that are coming in, and our federal partners helping in that, or this is just completely separate?
No, we'll look at all that, whether it was the same. And then your question on Du Bois Place, we've made some pretty significant progress in that case in finding the folks that were held accountable. But I think your question was regarding the management review and the police response, and that's in the process of being completed.
What was you said that you did find the people responsible. Is there any more?
I'm sorry?
You did find the people responsible?
We've made a lot of progress with regards to who's responsible. And we're hopeful to ensure that everyone's that's accountable. We had a 17-year-old father of a young child that was murdered and 22 others that were shot, as you know. And so we're going to give as many resources as needed to find the folks that are responsible for that.
Any officer status?
I got a chance to visit with her recently. She is recovering, so our thoughts and prayers continue to be with her.
Thank you,
Right.
everyone.
Thank you.